Hello everyone and welcome back to our 5-minute Bible study. Today we're talking about Genesis 23. As always, the PDF handout for this Bible study is available for free on our website. There's a link down in the description. Genesis 23. This should be a relatively quick one because this is a rather short chapter. When did the events of chapter 23 take place? Well, we have mentioned several times now that Abraham was born in about 1996 BC. His son was born 100 years later. That was Isaac. And Sarah, she is going to pass away in this chapter at the age of 127. So that would be approximately 1859 BC. In terms of our characters, we have Abraham. He's a man who moved from the Ur of the Chaldees to Canaan because God promised that he was going to give him and his descendants that land as an inheritance. Next, we have Abraham's wife, Sarah. And then finally, Ephron the Hittite man. He was a Hittite man who sold a piece of land, specifically the cave in the field of Machpelah, to Abraham, and we'll explain why in a little bit. In terms of our map, the key locations here, the first one is going to be Hebron. Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, which is also known as Hebron. And Sarah was buried in the cave of Machpelah, which was, quote, to the east of Mamre, that is, Hebron. If you haven't noticed, Hebron has quite a few names. It's sometimes called Mamre, sometimes called Kiriath Arba, sometimes called Hebron, but they're all the same general location. In terms of our outline, the first two verses tell us about the death of Sarah. So Sarah died when she was 127 years old. And at Sarah's death, Isaac would have been 37 years old and Abraham would have been 137. And the text just simply says that Abraham mourned her. In verses 3 through 20, Abraham purchases the field of Machpelah. So Abraham visited the Hittites because he wanted to purchase a plot of land where he could bury Sarah. And the Hittites told him that he could have basically anything, any place that he wanted to bury his wife. He asked if Ephron was willing to sell him the cave and the field of Machpelah. The men ended up agreeing to a price of 400 shekels of silver. And so then Abraham buried Sarah in the cave. So that's all we've got for Genesis chapter 23. I told you it was going to be quick. Let's talk about an application. We often talk about the greatness of the faith of Abraham, and he's held up as somebody to be admired, but we rarely consider the faith of Sarah. Here was a woman who was willing to move hundreds of miles away from her home and from her family to be obedient to God's instructions to Abraham to move to Canaan. The book of Hebrews tells us that she patiently waited for her promised son until she was 90 years old. And yes, she had her faults, but so did Abraham, and so do we. The Apostle Peter wrote that Christian women should consider themselves daughters of Sarah if they, quote, do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 6. So she is a role model, and her faith is a role model for Christian women of all ages.